Hello and welcome to Aetherion. Now for those of you who have joined the Patreon and read the first short story from the Age of Essence, you will have had your first glimpse and first experience in the world that is Aetherion. But for those of you who haven't yet read the story, I wanted to take a deep dive into the world and give you a little bit of a tour. Only briefly because this is a hugely rich world, full of different religions, cultures, powers, creatures, different civilizations. The world of Aetherion is alive and thriving, and it's a lot to cover. So this is going to be a very broad overview. I wanted to create this channel as a dedicated space for my series that I'm writing, The Age of Essence. If you aren't aware, my name is Isaac and I am an aspiring author. I've wrote my first short story and it's available to read on the Patreon, and as I write these short stories they will be slowly added to the Patreon, and this is part of a collection of short stories called Tales from Aetherion. Later down the line we will dive into the main storyline, which is huge. But for now we are just getting used to and diving into Aetherion for the first time. So I don't have the funds to commission a proper artist to make a map of Aetherion. So what you see on screen behind me is a hand-drawn version of the map by myself. I will put it on screen as well, but this is the map that I've created and I've divided it into locations because this is an essential part of the world. Now Aetherion is a big planet, but it's made up of two main continents. You've got one on the left and one on the right. So what are the two continents? Well, on the left, you've got Oberon, and on the right, the larger continent, you've got Valandor. Now, these aren't the only two places. You've also got a bunch of islands dotted towards the middle, and you've got some towards the bottom of Valandor. We'll start with Oberon because this is the smaller of the two continents. So Oberon's history is a rich one. As I said, we're not going to dive too deep into it, but all you need to know is this is a continent divided into three factions. You've got the top faction, which is Nivalis, the middle section, which is Alar, and the bottom section, which is Dunmara. Nivalis is a frozen landscape. This is a place that is covered in snow and ice, and while there are different terrains of mountain ranges and frozen lakes, everything you find here will have an iced covering over it. The center of Oberon, being Aetherion, is a much nicer place. This is the center of the continent, and this is more of a foresty terrain. Here you will find dense forests with giant, massive tall trees that reach to the sky like skyscrapers. Giant, thick trunks. There are different tribes and villages, and there is even a capital city within this place. Moving towards the bottom, you have probably the harshest place within Oberon. Dunmara is a scorched landscape. It's full of sand and heat, and it's not a nice place to live, with some sections of it even being uninhabitable. Now, before we dive into Valandor, I want to go through the few little islands that you'll find in between them. At the top you'll find a small island, Illindra Isle. Just below that you've got Thornhaven. To the side of that you've got Grimrock. Underneath you've got Halcoin Reef. Below that you've got Mistwatch, and further down you've got Dragonspine. Just hidden underneath Oberon there's also two small islands, those being Skyhold and Valegarden. So moving to Valandor, this is the main continent. This is the main chunk of the world. And because it's so big, there's different places within Valandor, there's different religions, there's different places, different types of people from all walks of life. So we'll start with the main chunk of Valandor, which is the whole middle section, which is called Garinth. Here you'll find the capital, Valkyrin, which, as I say, if you're part of the Patreon and you've read the first short story, this is where it takes place, and you'll know how this is divided, how this capital is not really all what it seems. It's not all grand of a place because of... You know what, I'm going to leave that. Now above Garinth, you've got Drake Mount. Drake Mount is a vastly mountainous range with some pockets of habitable places above the mountain range, but it's a brilliantly protected place if you want to get away from the capital. To the side of Garinth, you've got Lake Maya. This is quite a nice little place. Here you'll find marshes, lakes, wetlands. It frequently rains and it's very humid and damp, but the habitants, they've sort of adapted to it. Now, as I said, I'm not going to deep dive into all these places, but each of these locations have multiple settlements, villages, towns, control powers, just everything like that. So, as I say, I'm not going to deep dive into every single bit, but what I might do is make different videos where I deep dive into Garinth or I deep dive into Lake Maya, and you can find out a little bit more about each place. Underneath Lake Maya and underneath Garinth, you will find Verdan. Verdan is a luscious, vibrant place. You've got lakes, forests, streams running through it all. It sort of stays in its own lane, Verdan. It stays away from the rest of the world because of its thin join to Grinth. There's not a whole lot of joining in the conflict and crossover between them. So they kind of just keep to themselves. Just beneath Grinth, you've got this small slither of a location which is called Silvaris. Silvaris is one of the densest woodlands you will find in the whole world. It creates this sort of walled barrier between Grinth and what lies below, which is Storm's Ridge. Storm's Ridge is another rich place similar to Grinth in the sense that it has a lot of power and it's very modernized in the sense that there is thriving towns and economies and it's a little bit more developed than a place that like Verdan, you might say. And I'm not going to get into the conflicts between Stormridge and Grinth, but just consider this a teaser. Now, just at the edge of Storm's Ridge, you've got this small little tip called the Burning Sands. This is a place which, I'm not going to go into why, but is completely uninhabitable. The heat and the scorched earth, similar to Dunmara, is just a horrific place. Now, Valandor is sort of curved around, and in the center of its curve, you will find the Broken Isles. The Broken Isles is made up of multiple different little islands, and you'll find probably not the best of people here. This is a location that gives way to piracy and thugs and just sort of the less civilized of the world, you might say, with the biggest island and the sort of hub of the Broken Isles being Sorrow's End. So like I said, not going into too much detail, not going into too much of the villages and the religions and the cultures that take place, but as I've hinted at a few times, this is a world that is rich and thriving with different, just different cultures and communities, and religion plays a huge part into this world, into the conflicts, into what drives. I don't want to say too much, but this is a big driving factor. So I might give you an Aetherion history lesson at some point, but until then, I hope you enjoyed getting to know Aetherion a little bit better, even if it's only surface level.